So this is what we're making, a little pearl pendant on a spiral, and I'm using half round wire, 1.7 high by 3.5 wide, 53 millimeters long. I'm going to make a pearl pendant as a companion piece to the ring, so I'm going to do the same tapered swirl and then just make a bail on the end out of the same material. So basically 2 solder joins, one to solder the cup to the swirl and one to solder the pearl peg. So I reckon the first thing to do is to make our long taper on the end, and just as a matter of curiosity, what I want to do is measure how much it increases the length. Now, the ring was 62 millimeters, and I'm just going to cut a 50 millimeter long piece, probably be slightly more than I need, but it'll do. And I use my little bolt cutters to just chop this off because this end is going to have to be filed and sanded anyway. So first thing we'll do is anneal this so that we can taper roll it. So we'll just bring this up to a dull red. You can use any torch for this, it doesn't really matter. Windy. So that's our dull red. And we'll quench it in water and dry it off. Now, always make sure your material is dry before you introduce it to the rolling mill, because you'll rust your rollers otherwise. So our rollers are closed, and I just hold the material sideways, and I'm just rolling it about 20 millimeters. Then the next roller will be 10, then the next 5. So we just do half each time, and we end up with a nice long taper. Now, if it's not quite long enough, you can just go back and do it again. So now I'm happy with that nice long taper. Now, I started with a 53 millimeter long piece of material and taper rolling it, stretched it to 62. So basically it increased it 10 millimeters. So now I'm just going to take my Swiss No. 2 cut flat hand file and smooth my taper, because you can see that it's kind of stair-stepped at the moment. And we want to file this before we anneal it again, because it's easier, it's more effective if you file while the material is hard. after we've filed it smooth, then we'll take our 400 grade sandpaper on a sanding stick, get rid of all of our file marks, lovely. Now I need to anneal this again to be able to put my swirl in, but what I want to do first is cut my pearl cup, because then I'll make this swirl the proper size to fit the cup. So I'm cutting a 9.5 millimeter disc. 3/8 of an inch in imperial, and then we'll dome it in our doming block. So we make sure that the depression fits the disc and that our punch fits the depression. Now we could dome this because it was half hard metal. If it was hard, we would have had to anneal it. So now we have our cup, which is 8.8 diameter, and we can anneal our metal so that we can make our swirl fit the cup. So once again, just bring it up to a dull red. Lovely. Quench it in water and dry it off. Now you can wrap your material around whatever you have that's the right size, but I have these bale bending pliers which are different sizes, and that's 5, that's 7, and this one is 8.3. And I think that's going to be perfect because it'll be just slightly smaller than the cup. So I'm just going to grab the end so that there's a little bit sticking out, otherwise it'll snap back through. So I have a nice swirl now. And the cup sits in there quite nicely, holds itself so it'll be easy to solder. Fantastic. So I've got this cup down and my swirl just sitting over the cup. So we mix up our flux. Flux that. And I'm using a 3 millimeter long piece of hard solder. So we'll dry out our flux, make sure the solder stays in position. And we'll circle because we want the two pieces to be the same temperature. And because the ring shank that we're using is slightly thicker, we need to take our time. So you can see that the flux has gone clear, and then shortly the solder will flow. So there it goes. And I could see it flow around the curve, so that's lovely. So now we'll quench this in water. So we can have a look at it. I'm quite happy with that. And you can see by the color that my cup is sterling. And I do that because that's part of the structure. So I want it nice and tough. If it were just a bead cap, I would use fine silver. But no, this is good. So now we'll hallmark this, and we'll hallmark on this side because we're going to make that into a bail. So dry the material, file the bail end flat, lovely. Now I want 20 millimeters of this straight so that I can turn it into my bail. So that is that much, and I'll just hold this with my parallel jaw pliers. And bend it like that. And I held it with the parallel jaw pliers because I wanted this bit to stay straight. So now we have to hallmark it. And then we can use our bail bending pliers to make a nice round bail. So I'm using the 5 millimeter part of my pliers. Never grab the very end because oftentimes it'll slip off. So what we want to do now is get this in so it touches, and then we'll solder it, and then we'll solder a purl peg on. So you can just push and wiggle. And that's lovely. So now we'll solder it. So we'll flux where our bail touches. And then I'm using a 3 millimeter long piece of solder again. And I'm going to place that inside. And we'll dry out our flux, push the solder into position, and I'm heating out here and the solder's in there, so when the solder flows, it'll actually flow out so I can see it on this side. So the flux has gone clear and the solder flowed, and I could see it here. So that's lovely. That's what I want. So that's good. And we'll quench that. And I'm just going to hold this so it's nice and flat. And then I'm going to take a piece of 0.8 millimeter square wire, file the end flat, hold it in the middle, and solder it. Now this doesn't have to be perfect, but if you look at it from two different ways, this way and this way, you'll be able to see whether it really is in the center or not. So a little bit of flux and a 2 millimeter long piece of hard solder for this one, because it's just soldering that little 0.8 millimeter square. I find these GRS third hands and the charcoal blocks, the hard charcoal blocks, quite nice to work with. So now once again we're going to have to circle, because if we just go straight in with our flame, we'll melt our wire. So you don't want that solder to melt until the metal that you're heating is actually hot enough to melt your solder. Lovely. So once again we'll quench this in water, and then we'll be ready to pickle and polish. So I'm going to I'm going to twist my square purl peg wire using my parallel jaw pliers. And basically it just needs one complete twist, and that's just to give the glue a place to hold on to. So now we can cut that couple of millimeters above the cup, and I'll just hang this on my scribe and see where gravity holds it, and that's quite nice. I quite like that. So that's lovely. So now we can pickle it, and I use sodium bisulfate for pickle. All right, we're out of the pickle. Everything's lovely. Time to go in the tumbler and make it all shiny. All right, we're out of the tumbler, and I'm using a half-drilled purl. So we check to see if it fits. It does. We'll just glue this on and we're finished. So I'm using 5-minute 2-part epoxy, and I just put a spot on the hole, push it down in, another little spot on, drop the purl on. Make sure it's seated all the way around. It is. And we just leave it alone. Leave our toothpick in the glue so we can come back and check whether the glue has dried here. And that's it.